Well, congratulations to you all on your remarkable conference, and thank you for inviting me to deliver one of the keynote talks tonight. I wish to acknowledge my distinguished co-presenter this evening, Carl Anderson, and the remarkable work of the organization he heads, the Knights of Columbus. And most especially, congratulations to Tom Farr, who receives your Lifetime Achievement Award for his tireless, passionate, often groundbreaking work to defend religious freedom throughout the world. Religious minorities everywhere, including the Christian minorities in the Middle East, have no greater champion than Tom Farr, no one more willing to speak truth to power. Tom, I cherish our friendship and am abidingly honored to be your colleague in this work that we both cherish. Considering our theme, it is fitting to recognize the importance of this day, September 11th. It is a day to mourn with those who lost loved ones, even as we thank the heroic first responders who answered the call of duty so bravely 14 years ago. Their memory should always be a goad to us to act in time to prevent violence against those who differ. When I accepted the job as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom at the State Department, above all, I was committed to ensuring that the United States remain a forceful, effective advocate for the freedoms of thought, conscience, and belief, for the rights of all individuals to practice and choose and change their faith without fear, for the rights of all people not only to live their faith through worship, but through teaching and preaching, through practice and observance, and the right to hold no religious beliefs at all. Consequently, our office strongly seeks an end to anti-blasphemy and apostasy laws and is pushing harder than ever to have every government offer effective protection to endangered religious communities. As many of you know, the catastrophe facing Middle East minority religious groups was of deep personal concern even before I joined the State Department. I'm especially concerned with ISIL's promotion of a worldview so fundamentally and radically diametrically opposed to freedom of religion, a worldview it uses to justify its violent actions that violate core human rights values at every level. ISIL's rise and the threat it presents demonstrate the strong and complex link between religious freedom and other human rights and security. Over the decades, many have been forced to flee, and we fear many more will flee in the future. You all know the numbers. You've heard them over and over again. We must make sure the world never forgets them. In Iraq, over 3 million people have fled their homes in the last year and a half. 3 million people. Don't focus on the 3 million. Focus on the human beings, every one of them. A child, a mother, a father, a brother, a friend. Everyone who had dreams for what their future would be. 12 million Syrians have been displaced since 2011, 4 million of whom have left the country, with more fleeing every day at the risk of their lives. Prior to 2003, Iraq's estimated Christian population was 1.5 million, currently 300,000. The Mandaeans went from about 30,000 to 3,000 in the same period. In Syria, more than half of the country's Christian population have been displaced. The cycle of armed conflict and displacement threatens the extraordinary diverse mosaic of communities in the Middle East. Now, let's be clear. The threat of these historic communities has radically increased. The continued existence of Christians and others in Iraq and Syria is deeply jeopardized by an exponential increase in risk from violent extremist groups and from the combat of civil war in Syria. The sustained horror being meted out by ISIL against Christians and all groups at variance with ISIL's ideology has contributed to massive displacement of entire communities. It has been the intent of these violent extremists to eliminate these unwanted groups from their midst, at the same time we cannot absolve the Syrian government from its responsibilities to the Syrian people. The government has massively failed in its responsibility to protect its own people. It has been the cause of much of the violence as well. This climate of violence has transformed an historic community, a historic nation, marked by tolerance and coexistence between communities, into profound divisiveness and created an increasingly sectarian environment that damages and undermines the well-being of all communities, including Christian and other religious minorities. Christian and other religious and ethnic minorities are being killed, kidnapped, held hostage, enslaved, forced to convert, forced to marry ISIL soldiers. Their collective existence in the lands of their birth, in the birth of their ancestors so far back in history, their continued presence as peoples of a rich heritage in a formerly diverse region is threatened by ISIL. ISIL intensifies this process by desecrating and destroying the cultural patrimony and heritage of these historic communities. ISIL's acts in this regard are crimes against history and against the future. They are clear violations of international law, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. It is not only religious and ethnic minorities who suffer at the hands of ISIL. Anyone who opposes ISIL is targeted regardless of their identity, such as when ISIL executed over 700 members of the Sunni Muslim Shaitat tribe in eastern Syria over a 2-week period last summer. In Iraq, ISIL executed over 700 members of the Sunni Muslim Abu Namir tribe in western Iraq in October, executed 13 Sunni imams in Iraq for failing to swear their allegiance to its terrorist cause. And when ISIL took over Camp Speicher, it summarily executed up as many as 1,700 Shia Air Force cadets. Following ISIL's offensive in the Nineveh Plain and the siege of tens of thousands of Yazidis on Mount Sinjar, over 5,000 people, mostly men and boys, were killed, approximately 3,500 women and children taken captive, and to this day, many of those women and children are taken prisoner, continue to be enslaved, raped, sold, or given as compensation to ISIL fighters. I think many of you know the remarkable role that my superb staff played in providing vital context on the ground as the Yazidi crisis was breaking in the Syrian Christian crisis at the Kaba River area was developing. Lives were saved because of the context that we had and the information they were able to provide. And the first trip I took as ambassador at large was to Iraq, so I can meet in person the victims of ISIL violence and aggression, meet with religious leaders to find out what was necessary for them to remain there, and those who wish to return to their homes. During our trip, we met with representatives of nearly every religious and ethnic group in the country, and we use our direct links with the coalition counter-ISIL teams, which includes both military and non-military components, to ensure that the needs of vulnerable populations are fully understood and addressed in our broader efforts. And we're facilitating meetings, many of you have been part of those, of representatives of targeted communities in Washington and elsewhere with senior U.S. officials so that they may hear directly about the needs of these vulnerable communities and help shape policies that will be effective in supporting these communities. Later this month, Pope Francis will visit Washington. He's spoken often about his concerns for the people of the Middle East and the attacks upon them that are motivated by religious and ethnic hatred. On September 6th, the Pope called for each European parish to take in one refugee family. What an extraordinary moral statement that was. President Obama has since announced a significant increase in our own Syrian refugee numbers with a possibility of even higher numbers. And like Pope Francis, we will look to our civil society partners and religious leaders in the United States to absorb these new immigrant families. But let me focus on those who wish to remain in Iraq and Syria, those who wish to return to their home communities. We know that there are indispensable steps that will need to happen if we are to achieve this daunting goal. First, ISIL must be defeated. And you know the actions we're taking. They have helped, and they are not enough. We all, in the international community, need to do more. Second, we must stabilize the condition of displaced communities. The United States has given over $4.5 billion to help in humanitarian support for the displaced communities of Syria and Iraq since the fighting in these two countries began. And these programs, in addition, we've put in our human rights programs $83 million in assistance for religious and ethnic minority communities, promoting respect for human rights, interfaith cooperation and tolerance, community stabilization, rule of law, conflict mitigation, and cultural preservation. Third, until ISIL is pushed out, displaced communities need to be able to live with a quality of life that provides them with an incentive to remain in the country and to voluntarily return to their homes. Our humanitarian aid helps, but we are still, as an international community, far short of what the UN says is needed. And we must be sure, fourth, that the young people in these communities have schools to go to and jobs when they graduate if we are to prevent the perpetuation of the cycle of frustration and despair on which extremists so often rely. Fourth, there must be a security system that will protect them on their return, which they have faith in, they have trust in. They felt betrayed by what happened in Mosul. That can't happen again. The areas liberated from ISIL must be stabilized. Returning residents of all faiths must have a guarantee of real security, including security forces that involve members of their own communities. We should reinforce with host governments the need for other actors, such as the Shia militias, to also respect human rights in the areas liberated from ISIL. Fifth, there needs to be a holistic transitional justice plan that includes multiple mechanisms, not just the high-level prosecutions for crimes against humanity, but mechanisms to handle the extraordinary tensions that will accompany the return of all displaced community to homes and businesses that have been occupied by former neighbors, some of whom were complicit or stood by idly as ISIL moved in and wreaked terror on those communities. This must involve reconciliation and strong steps to prevent revenge violence on all sides. Six, the minority groups must have all the rights, privileges, and obligations of citizenship with equal participation in governance in a way that ensures their security and freedom to practice their religion for the immediate and long-term future. Prime Minister Abadi has taken some concrete steps in this direction, and we must encourage him to expand them and support him in such efforts. Finally, there has to be a plan for the economic revival of the Nineveh Plain and the liberated areas in order for those communities to return and remain. Daunting challenges all, but the U.S. is playing a lead role in pushing local and international efforts to get ready for that day. If we wait until ISIL is fully defeated, we will leave a vacuum that violence will quickly fill. We must begin preparing now. Since I began my work as ambassador at large, we've witnessed attacks on religious communities in Paris and Copenhagen, the destruction of Baga, Nigeria, by the Boko Haram, churches and mosques destroyed there, arsons of churches in Pakistan, the capture and displacement of Assyrian Christians by ISIL in Syria, the oppression of the Rohingya Muslims in Burma, far too many other tragedies. I have traveled to Vietnam, Sudan, Burma, Pakistan, China, Saudi Arabia, to advocate for the advancement of religious freedom and to speak out when religious minorities, often Christians, are being oppressed. As you may have read, I just returned from China, where I called for an end to the ongoing campaign of cross removals and church demolitions in Zhejiang province. I raised that at every meeting with every government official at every level that we had. We called for the easing of restrictions on house churches and other unregistered religious groups and an end to the oppression of Uyghur Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists. These persistent problems check the impact of some other encouraging signs in China. But remember this, despite all the challenges that Christians and other groups face, in every country that I have visited, every single one, where churches are able to function with a modicum of safety, they are bursting with religious fervor, with prayer, with song, with young families. No matter how oppressive things may be and how restrictive things may be, it is extraordinary what you see in the churches, even in these countries that I have named, at least those that I've named that allow churches here. And I become even more convinced that without the promotion of religious freedom, there will never be real stability, real democracy, real lasting security in any of those countries. But with it, anything is possible. For those in peril today, we must act now. We cannot wait. But for all of humanity, we must address these challenges worldwide for the long run as well. As Dr. King said, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice through the work that you do in defense of Christians. And I pray that the work I do as well, you, all of you here, are benders of that arc, and humanity will be the better for it. Thank you, and God bless you in your important endeavors.